They say the last words you hear before a crash are screams. That night at Fort McCall Medical Annex, the last words were quieter. "We're going to die." A Navy SEAL said it like a diagnosis, staring through the cockpit glass at a blizzard so thick it erased the runway lights. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic blood and failing heat. 2 operators were bleeding through dressings that wouldn't hold. The pilot was already gone. Every radio channel was nothing but snow. And then a rookie nurse in scrubs and an oversized parka stepped into the hangar's darkness and said, "I can fly the medevac." If you've ever felt trapped in a room where the clock is louder than your own breathing, this story is for you. Stay to the end, because what happens next isn't just survival. It's a test of trust triage and the kind of courage nobody sees coming. Like the video and comment where you're watching from. Her words hung in the air after the laughter died, not loud enough to sound brave, not soft enough to sound like a plea. "I can fly the medevac." In that moment, Chief Mason Rourke did not look at the storm. He looked at her hands, at how still they were, as if he had learned the hard way that a person's truth shows up in the small muscles first. A few hours earlier, Fort McCall Medical Annex had been ordinary in the way remote places learn to be ordinary. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The coffee tasted like burnt pennies. The halls smelled of disinfectant and old heat. Outside, Bismarck's winter was already leaning on the walls, but the wind had not started screaming yet. It was the kind of night where the nurses counted supplies, the surgeons caught up on charts, and the generator was just a sound you stopped noticing once you worked there long enough. Dr. Ethan Hale had been halfway through his 3rd cup when the call came in from the flight line. "Incoming, too critical, no time to prep." The voice on the intercom had that clipped edge people get when they are trying to keep panic from spilling into policy. Nurse Sandra Pike moved first. She always did. She was the kind of nurse who could pull a line in the dark, who could read a patient's story in the way their skin held tension. She yanked open the trauma bay cabinets and started laying out what she would need without saying a word. Tourniquets, chest seals, warmed fluids, pressure bags. She looked at Lucy Grant and jerked her chin toward the warmer. Saline Sandra said, 2 liters start it now. Lucy crossed the room, pulled on gloves, and opened the warming unit. The heat inside smelled faintly of rubber and antiseptic. She checked the bags by touch, then by label, then set them where Sandra could grab them without looking. Her movements were clean and quiet, like she had learned not to waste sound. The doors burst open with a gust of cold and a blur of white. 5 men came in, faces raw from wind eyes scanning corners by reflex. They moved like they were still outside, like the building was just another environment to clear. 2 of them carried a third between them, his boots dragging his breathing shallow. Blood had soaked through the dressing under his ribs and spread dark across his shirt. Behind them, another man stumbled in on his own shaking, hard skin, pale lips losing color. He tried to shrug off help as if pride could keep his core temperature up. Dr. Hale caught his arm anyway. "Sit," Hale said. "Now." The man's eyes flicked to the doctor's hands, then to the ceiling, then to the doorway, taking inventory even while his body lost the argument with the cold. Chief Rourke came in last. He had the quiet weight of authority, the kind that did not need to raise its voice because everyone around it already knew what it meant. He looked at the trauma room in one sweep, then at the men on the gurneys, then at Hale. "We went down short of the runway," Rourke said. His voice was steady, but the edges were tight, wind shear, whiteout. "We made it in on luck and muscle." Sandra cut the injured man's shirt with trauma shears. The fabric peeled back wet. The wound under his ribs was ugly and deep, a laceration that had chewed through layers and kept bleeding like the body had forgotten how to stop. Sandra pressed gauze into it and felt the heat of fresh blood soak her gloves. "This is not holding," she said. Hale leaned in, eyes already working through possibilities. "Pressure dressing now. Type and cross. O negative until we have it. Ultrasound." Lucy rolled the machine closer, the wheels squeaking once. She hated that squeak. It sounded small and helpless in a room like this. She steadied the cart with her knee and handed Hale the probe without being asked. On the second gurney, the hypothermic operator's teeth chattered so hard it looked painful. His hands trembled against the blanket Sandra threw over him. His eyes tried to stay open, but every blink lasted a fraction too long. "Hey, Lucy," said, leaning close so he could hear her without shouting. "Stay with me, look at my face." His gaze struggled toward hers. His pupils were wide, hungry for heat. He tried to form words, failed, then swallowed and tried again. "Pilot," he managed. "Where's Lawson?" No one answered. Not because they did not hear him, because the answer was not yet shaped into something anyone wanted to say. Rourke's team kept their rifles slung, but their bodies were angled toward the doors, toward windows, toward any place danger could become real. One of them, a younger operator with a hard jaw and a fresh cut on his cheek, looked at the small trauma bay like it offended him. "This is it," he said. Sandra did not look up. "This is what we have." Rourke's gaze drifted across the room and landed on Lucy for a brief moment. Not long enough to be anything, just long enough to register her presence, her name badge, her calm. Then he turned away and pulled a radio from his vest, the kind that had saved lives in places where maps ended. He keyed it once. "Redstone, this is Rourke. We are down at Fort McCall. 2 wounded. Request evac and ground support." Nothing answered but static, a thick hiss like wind in a dead channel. He changed frequency. Tried again. Static. One of his men pulled out a satellite phone, thumbed it on like a ritual, then stared at the screen as it stayed black. "Dead," the man said. Hale glanced up from the ultrasound screen. "The storm is moving in fast," he said, as if the weather were a complication on a chart. Rourke did not correct him. He did not have to. Everyone in that room could feel it. The pressure change. The building's tiny shifts. The way the air seemed to tighten around the windows. Sandra secured the pressure dressing, then looked at Hale. "He's still seeping." Hale's jaw set. "We need to get him to surgery." "We need power to keep him alive in surgery," Sandra said. Lucy was already at the warmer again, pulling out another bag. She felt the tremor in the building when the wind hit the outer wall. The vents breathed out heat in a steady exhale, then faltered for a heartbeat, then recovered. It was subtle. Most people did not notice subtle things in the middle of blood. Lucy noticed. She stepped into the hall and listened. Not with her ears only. With her body. The generator hum was low and uneven under the floor like an engine whose timing was drifting. Sandra saw her and frowned. Lucy turned back. "The load is spiking," she said. Sandra blinked. "What?" Lucy kept her voice calm as if she were reporting vitals. "Every time the wind surges, the heating kicks harder. The generator compensates. It is working too hard." Hale waved a hand, distracted. "We have backup." Sandra did not look convinced. Backup is still a machine. The first injured SEAL's blood pressure dipped. Hale snapped into motion, voice sharp. "Push fluids, start blood." Lucy spiked the line, hung the bag, and squeezed the pressure infuser until the fluid surged. She watched the drip chamber, watched the line, watched the monitor. The numbers climbed, then hovered like they were thinking about it. On the other bed, the hypothermic operator's heart rate slowed in a way that was not restful. It was the kind of slowing that came before the body stopped fighting. Sandra pulled off his wet gloves and rubbed his hands briskly. "Stay awake," she said. "I mean it. Stay angry if you have to." He tried to smile, failed, and swallowed. "We got stuck," he said. Rourke heard it and looked up. "Where's Lawson?" he asked again, this time to no one in particular. The room hesitated. Even the monitors seemed to pause between beeps. Dr. Hale's eyes flicked to Sandra, then to Lucy, then back to Rourke. His throat worked. "He got sick," Hale said. "Fever came on fast after we brought you in. We treated it. Fluids. Cooling. He was already hypothermic from the flight line, and then the fever spiked on top of it. He crashed." Rourke did not move. He simply stared at Hale with a flat focus that made the air feel thinner. "Cracked," how Rourke said. Hale swallowed again. He died. One of the seals let out a short breath that could have been a laugh if it had not sounded so bitter. Another looked away, as if staring at the wall would keep the fact from settling in. Rourke nodded once. Not acceptance in the gentle sense. Acceptance like a door closing. "Where is he?" Rourke asked. "In the morgue room," Hale said. "We did what we could." Rourke's eyes did not soften. He did not offer comfort. He did not need comfort. He needed a path. He stepped into the hall, motioned for his men to follow, then stopped at the nurse station. His gaze landed on the wall phone. The landline was still there, old and stubborn. Sandra picked it up and held it to her ear. Silence. No dial tone. She set it down slowly, like it might shatter if she moved too fast. The storm cut the lines, she said. Lucy watched the ceiling light flicker again this time, long enough to make Sandra's face look hollow. Hale came out of the trauma bay, gloves, stained eyes, tired. "We cannot stay here," he said. He tried to sound certain, but his voice cracked on the last word. Rourke's men shifted. The way men shift when they hear someone say something obvious too late. "There's nowhere to go," the younger SEAL snapped. Hale spread his hands, palms up, pleading without meaning to. "If we lose heat, we lose them. We lose everyone." The wind slammed the building harder. The windows rattled. The outer doors made a sound like a giant hand testing their strength. Sandra's eyes darted to the hallway that led to the hangar. "The helicopter," she said. The younger SEAL turned his head sharply as if offended by hope. "The pilot is dead." Sandra opened her mouth, then closed it. Her expression tightened. She was not a woman easily rattled, but she was not blind to reality either. Rourke looked down the hall toward the hangar corridor. The light in that direction seemed dimmer, as if the building itself was rationing power. He took a step, then stopped listening. The generator hummed, dipped, recovered, then dipped again. A stutter, a warning. He turned back toward Hale. "How long?" he asked. Hale blinked. "What? How long until it fails?" Rourke said, and the flatness in his voice made it clear that he was not asking for comfort. He was asking for a clock. Hale looked at the maintenance panel like it might answer him. "I do not know." Sandra's mouth tightened. She glanced at Lucy without meaning to. Lucy met her eyes, then looked at the vents, then at the ceiling light that flickered again. "If it drops one more time," Lucy said quietly, "it fails within the hour." Everyone turned to her. Hale looked surprised. Sandra looked like she had been expecting it. Rourke looked at Lucy the way he looked at doors before he opened them. Hale forced a laugh that did not land. "How would you know that?" he asked. Lucy did not rise to the bait. "Because the load curve is wrong," she said. "Because the pitch of the generator changed. Because the heater cycles are longer every time the wind surges." The younger SEAL scoffed. "She's a nurse." Lucy's eyes flicked to him once, calm and cold. "A nurse who watches people die when systems fail," she said. "Heat first, light second, monitors third, then the rest is just time." The hypothermic operator coughed behind them, a wet sound. Sandra moved back into the trauma bay, checked his pulse, then looked up at Hale. "If he drops much lower, the blood won't clot," she said. "Not in surgery, not anywhere." Hale's shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked small in his own building. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes for a beat too long. Rourke's gaze slid toward the main entrance. The SEALs were still, not relaxed. Still like predators listening for movement outside their range of sight. "Barricade the doors," Rourke said. Hale straightened. "What?" Rourke did not repeat himself. One of his men moved immediately, dragged a heavy cabinet toward the entrance, as if it weighed nothing. Another checked the side corridor, palm brushing the wall for orientation. The younger SEAL pulled a magazine, counted rounds by feel, then seated it back with a click that sounded loud in the quiet hall. Hale watched them like they were overreacting. "No one is coming," he said. "No one can even drive in this." Rourke's eyes stayed on the glass of the front doors. Snow whipped past so thick it looked like the world was being erased frame by frame. People come in storms, he said. Sometimes because they know no one else will. Sandra returned from the trauma bay and wiped her gloves on a towel. You think this is an attack, she said, not accusing, just trying to understand. Rourke did not answer directly. This place sits on a quiet supply route, he said. Quiet routes attract quiet problems. Hale scoffed. We are a medical annex. Rourke finally looked at him. Then keep being one, he said. Do your job, let us do ours. Hale bristled, then deflated when the lights flickered again longer this time. The monitors beeped in protest. A ventilator in the ICU wing gave a warning chirp that cut through the hall like a blade. Sandra's face tightened. She looked at Lucy again. How long until we start losing patients upstairs? She asked. Lucy answered without hesitation. Minutes after heat drops, she said. The ICU vents freeze. Lines stiffen. People shiver, then stop shivering. That is when it gets dangerous. Hale ran a hand through his hair. We have a warming room, he said, grasping at options. We can move them into one space. Sandra nodded slowly. We can try. Rourke's voice cut through it. Try does not move people out, he said. The younger SEAL stepped forward, anger sharp and misplaced. So, we sit and freeze, he said, or we sit and bleed, great plan. Rourke did not respond to the tone. He responded to the fact beneath it. He looked at the trauma bay doors, at the blood on the floor that staff had not had time to clean. He looked at the stretcher wheels, the oxygen tanks, the thin walls. He looked at the storm outside that made even the floodlights look tired. Sandra's eyes glistened for a moment, then she blinked hard and made them dry. We keep them alive, she said. That is what we do. Lucy stood near the nurse station and checked the crash cart not because anyone asked, but because her hands needed a task to keep her mind clear. She counted epinephrine vials, checked airway kits, made sure the defibrillator battery was full. Small acts of control inside a building, losing control. Rourke watched her do it for a beat, then looked away. He walked the hall, checked the side doors, tested the locks. He did it without drama. His men followed with that same discipline that looked like calm to people who had never seen it up close. Hale went back into the trauma bay and scrubbed in for surgery like he could cut his way out of the storm. Sandra followed, her shoulders set. Lucy followed last, carrying supplies, stepping around blood like it was part of the floor plan. Inside, the wounded SEAL with the rib wound stared at the ceiling. His skin had gone clammy. His eyes were still sharp, but there was something in them that made Lucy's stomach twist. Not fear, calculation. He grabbed Lucy's sleeve when she leaned in to adjust his line. His grip was weak but stubborn. "Who are you?" he whispered. Lucy paused. "Lucy," she said. "Nurse." His eyes narrowed. "You talk like an engineer." Lucy met his gaze. "I talk like someone who likes patients alive," she said. He studied her for a second longer, then released her sleeve. "Keep me that way," he murmured. Hale made the first incision and blood welled. The suction sounded loud, hungry. Sandra's hands moved with practiced speed. Lucy passed instruments without looking. The room became a tunnel of focus where only immediate things existed. Then the lights flickered again, this time long enough for the surgical field to shift in shadow, long enough for Hale's heart to jump, and his hand to tighten on the scalpel. Sandra's voice stayed steady. "Keep going," she said. Lucy's eyes went to the overhead lamps. She could hear the generator in the bones of the building. The pitch was lower now. The stutter had lengthened. Hale's jaw flexed. "We finish fast," he said. Sandra did not argue. She simply worked faster. In the hallway outside the trauma bay, Rourke keyed his radio again, not because it had started working, but because he refused to stop trying. He changed angles, moved closer to a window, lifted the antenna, then tried again. Static. The wind howled so hard it made the building feel like it was drifting. Somewhere above, a ceiling vent rattled like loose teeth. A loud bang hit the outer wall, followed by another. The sound did not travel like wind. It traveled like weight. Rourke froze, head turning slightly. His men froze with him. The younger SEAL's face tightened. That was not the storm, the younger SEAL said. Rourke did not answer. He lifted a hand and his team shifted into positions with no spoken command, rifles coming up, feet, quiet angles covered. The medical staff did not notice at first, not until Sandra stepped out of surgery to grab more gauze and saw the line of armed men in the hall, their faces set. Chief, Sandra said, and there was a warning in her voice now. Rourke's eyes stayed on the door. Keep your people inside, he said. Keep them quiet. Sandra looked back toward the trauma bay. We have patience, she said. I know, Rourke replied. The generator dipped again. The lights dimmed. The monitors chirped. The building held its breath, then the hum returned, thinner than before. Lucy stepped out into the hall, her gloves still on her eyes on the ceiling. She listened again. The sound was wrong. The rhythm was wrong. Hale followed her, still in surgical gown. You, he said, pointing at Lucy as if blame could become a solution. If you know so much, fix it. Lucy looked at him, calm. I cannot fix it, she said. I can tell you what it is doing. Hale's face reddened. Then tell me. Lucy's gaze slid to the maintenance panel, then to the hallway leading to the hangar. It is going to fail, she said, soon. Sandra stepped closer. How soon, she asked. Lucy took a slow breath. Within the hour. If it drops again, she said, heat goes first. Hale's eyes widened. We move everyone into the warming room, he said, voice rising. We close doors. We conserve heat. We wait it out. Rourke turned his head toward Hale, and the look in his eyes stopped the doctor's words mid-stride. We do not wait, Rourke said. Hale stared back. Then what do you suggest, he snapped. Rourke's gaze went to the hangar corridor again. His mind was already there. He was already counting steps, seconds, options. There is a helicopter, Hale said, almost spitting the words as if they were an insult. But the pilot is dead. The younger SEAL let out a bitter laugh. So we freeze. Or we get shot if someone decides to come in here and take what they want. Pick your poison. Silence followed, thick and ugly. Lucy watched it settle on the room like frost. She watched Hale's shoulders sag. She watched Sandra's eyes shine and then harden. She watched Rourke's men adjust their grips like they could squeeze reality into a different shape. Rourke exhaled slow, and when he spoke his voice had the weight of a verdict. We are going to die here, he said. Lucy did not step forward dramatically. She simply stepped forward. One pace, then another. Like she belonged in the center of the conversation as much as any man with a rifle. There is a helicopter, she said. Rourke's eyes locked onto hers. Yes, he replied. And the pilot is dead. Lucy's voice stayed even. Then, we do not need the pilot. The younger SEAL laughed, sharp and cruel, because fear did not know where else to go. This is not a motivational speech. This is North Dakota. This is a blizzard. Lucy looked at him once, then looked back at Rourke. I can fly the medevac, she said. The hallway went still, not because they believed her, because the idea was too big to hold without breaking something. Rourke stepped closer, close enough that Lucy could see the fine frost crusted along the seams of his gloves. His eyes did not blink. Say that again, he said. Lucy met his stare. I can fly it, she repeated. Not like it is easy, not like it is safe. But if the choice is dying here, I can fly it. Rourke studied her face. The calm was not an act. It sat on her like it belonged there. He shifted his gaze to her hands, still steady. Where did you learn, he asked. Lucy did not raise her voice. She did not try to impress. She simply spoke the truth the way she would call out a blood pressure. Raven 1 cross-trained, she said. The younger SEAL started to scoff again, then stopped when he saw Rourke's expression change. The name landed in the hall like a dropped weapon. Rourke's face went blank the way it goes when a man opens a file he did not want to see. He held Lucy's stare for a long second. Then the generator stuttered again, deeper this time. The lights dimmed. Somewhere in the building, an alarm chirped and died. Rourke's jaw tightened. All right, he said. He turned, and his team moved with him like one body. "Show me." Rourke did not say it twice. He did not need to. The words, "show me," were enough to pull the whole building into motion. His team moved like a single organism learning a new room. One operator stayed in the hallway outside trauma rifle angled down, but ready eyes tracking the entrance and the side corridor that led to storage and the loading dock. Another drifted toward the main doors with a heavy cabinet already half dragged into place, boots planted wide for leverage. The quiet one, Jonah Kincaid, took the far end near a window and stared through the glass as if he could see past the white. Troy Maddox checked the lock on the stairwell, then put his shoulder against it once feeling for weakness. Cole Vance, the younger one with the sharp mouth, flipped his weapon light on for half a second, then clicked it off again like he hated the idea of giving anything away. "Stay here," Rourke told them, voice low. "No hero moves, no noise." His gaze slid to the trauma bay door. Inside, Dr. Ethan Hale and Nurse Sandra Pike were still fighting blood loss and cold, with the kind of focus that made time feel different. A suction canister gurgled. A monitor beeped at a steady pace that sounded almost polite compared to the wind. Sandra pressed her shoulder into the work hands, moving fast, but controlled, keeping pressure where pressure mattered. Hale leaned over the incision with a tight mouth, the tendons in his forearm rigid as he worked. Rourke opened the trauma bay door just enough to speak without letting cold air spill in. "Doc," he said. Hale looked up, irritation already forming, then stopped when he saw Rourke's expression. "Keep doing what you're doing," Rourke said. "Do not leave that room unless the building is on fire." Hale bristled. "You cannot order me." Rourke held his gaze a beat. "I am not ordering you. I am telling you the only way your patients live is if someone keeps the rest of us alive." Sandra did not look up, but her voice cut through the tension. "Ethan, stay. Let them handle the hallway." Hale's jaw flexed. He swallowed whatever pride he was about to throw. "Fine," he said. "But if your nurse gets us killed..." Rourke's eyes went to Lucy, standing in the hall with her hands already gloved. Her parka zipped, her badge tucked under a strap like she had learned to hide anything that could snag. "She is not my nurse," Rourke said. "She is our exit." Lucy did not react to the weight in that sentence. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a task, then turned toward the hangar corridor. The corridor was narrower than it had any right to be, poured concrete that held cold like memory. The overhead lights were dimmer here, and the storm's voice grew louder with every step, a constant howl that pressed against the walls like an animal trying to get in. The air smelled of oil and metal and that sterile hospital scent that never truly left your clothes. Lucy walked first, not rushing, not hesitating. Rourke followed at her shoulder, rifle held low, eyes sweeping corners, the toe of his boot touching each step like he was feeling for vibration through the floor. Behind him, Kincaid shadowed them for 10 paces, then peeled off to cover the intersection with the loading dock, leaving Rourke and Lucy alone in the corridor's thin light. Rourke leaned slightly toward her without taking his eyes off the far door. "If you are lying," he said quietly, "I will not have time to be careful about it." Lucy's breath fogged the air in front of her face. She did not look at him. "If I am lying," she answered, "then you will not have time for anything." Rourke heard the steadiness in her tone and felt something tighten behind his ribs. He had met calm like this before, but not often, and never by accident. Calm like this came from repetition, from rooms where screaming did not help, and silence got you out alive. They reached the heavy steel door that led into the hangar passage. Frost clung to the frame in uneven ridges. Lucy put her gloved hand on the latch. For a moment, she paused, listening as if checking the building's pulse. Rourke noticed. "You hear something?" Lucy shook her head once. "I hear the generator," she said. "It is getting worse." Rourke set his jaw. "Then move." The door opened with a reluctant groan. Cold hit them hard, sharper than the hospital's heated air, the kind that made your teeth ache. The hangar beyond was vast compared to the annex hallways, but it felt smaller tonight because of the storm pressing at every seam. The overhead lights flickered, each one buzzing like a trapped insect. Snow had found its way in through cracks along the doors, thin drifts gathering at the edges. The medevac helicopter sat on the concrete with its nose slightly angled rotors still matte paint dulled by frost. A red cross marking on the side looked muted, in the weak light more warning than comfort. A stretcher rack was visible through the open cabin door, straps hanging loose like empty hands. Near the maintenance table a flight jacket lay folded with too much care. A coffee cup sat beside it, frozen ringed residue clinging to the inside like a fossil. Rourke's gaze caught on the jacket and held. "Lawson," he said under his breath. Lucy did not comment. She had learned the rule of grief in busy places. You acknowledge it once, then you keep moving. She climbed onto the side step and pulled herself into the cockpit. The interior smelled of cold plastic and stale air. The panel was dark. No gentle glow, no welcoming beep, just dead screens reflecting her face back at her. Rourke stepped up behind her and leaned into the doorway, staying out of the seat. He wanted room to move, room to shoot if he had to, and room to watch her hands. Lucy slid into the pilot seat like it was familiar, then adjusted the harness without looking for the latch. Her gloves moved over the console with a confidence that had nothing to do with bravado. She checked the battery switch, then paused, eyes narrowing as if reading a problem written in dim light. "Battery's low," she said. Rourke kept his voice flat. "How low?" Lucy's fingers tapped a gauge, low enough that I do not get many attempts. She reached for a flashlight clipped to her chest strap and angled it across the panel. She did not sweep the beam wildly. She placed it where she needed it controlled and precise. Fuel quantity, hydraulic pressure, external power status, starter, anti-ice indicators. Rourke watched her hands more than the panel. There was no searching, no fumbling, no hesitation that came from guessing. Even the way she braced her wrist against the console was practiced. "What is this bird?" Rourke asked. Lucy did not look up. "HH-60M configured for medevac," she said. "Different medical load, extra power draw. Startup can be touchy when it is cold-soaked." Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. "You sound like someone who has said that before." Lucy's mouth tightened. "I have." Rourke leaned closer, voice low. "How much flight time?" Lucy's hand stayed busy. "Enough. That is not a number." Lucy flicked another switch and a single indicator light blinked alive, weak and dim, like the helicopter was trying to wake up but did not want to. "They did not log my hours," she said. Rourke felt the hairs on his neck rise. Why? Lucy's jaw set. Because the program did not exist. Rourke held that, then shifted to the next pressure point. "Who trained you?" Lucy paused. It was small, just one breath held too long, but in a room like this, it was loud. "Warrant Officer James Mercer," she said. The name hit Rourke like a fist. For a moment, he forgot the storm, forgot the cold, forgot the failing generator. "That man is dead," he said quietly. Lucy's eyes stayed on the panel. "I know." Rourke felt something harden behind his eyes. "How do you know?" Lucy finally looked at him. Her gaze was calm, but there was a line of tension at the corner of her mouth that suggested she was holding a door shut inside herself. "He died making sure I could land," she said. The words did not ask for sympathy. They stated a fact like a scar stated a history. Rourke stared at her for a second longer than he intended, then forced himself back into motion. "All right," he said. "Get it started." Lucy nodded once. She checked the engine intake indicators, then frowned. "Intake might be icing," she murmured. Rourke's grip tightened on his rifle. "Can you clear it?" "If it is light," Lucy said. "If it is heavy, we will need to ice spray and time." Rourke almost laughed at the word time. The building had none to spare. Lucy reached down and pulled a laminated checklist from a pocket beside the seat, flipping it open with the ease of muscle memory. Her eyes moved across the lines quickly, not reading like a student, but confirming like a professional. Rourke watched her face. "Even one," he said, voice low. Lucy's eyes flicked up. "Cross-train," Rourke continued. "You said it like you expected me to know it." Lucy held his gaze, then returned to the checklist. People who needed to know knew she said. People who did not were safer that way. Rourke felt his mouth go dry. Why was a nurse in that? Lucy's hands paused, then resumed. I was not a nurse, then she said. Rourke's stare sharpened. What were you? Lucy did not answer directly. She moved her finger to the next step and flicked the battery switch in sequence with another control. The panel did not light up the way it should. A soft click sounded, then nothing. Lucy exhaled slowly. We have barely enough to try an engine start, she said. If it fails, we lose more battery. Rourke's voice stayed controlled. Try. Lucy pressed the starter. For a heartbeat, the helicopter answered with a low whine, faint and weak like a throat clearing. The sound rose, then faltered. The engine coughed once, then died. The cockpit fell silent again except for the storm outside and the faint uneven hum of the hangar lights. Lucy's eyes narrowed. She did not curse, she did not panic. She simply noted the failure and moved to the next check. Battery dropped further, she said, watching the gauge. We have fewer tries. Rourke leaned closer. What do you need? Lucy's eyes scanned the panel. External power would help, she said. Do you have a ground power unit? Rourke's mouth tightened. Maintenance room might, but it is in the annex. Lucy nodded once as if filing it away. Then we do this with what we have. She checked the fuel line status next, then the bleed air, then the starter circuit. Her fingers moved quickly, but did not lose precision. She paused at one switch and touched it lightly as if feeling whether it was in the right position. Rourke caught the tiny hesitation. What he asked. Lucy shook her head. Nothing yet, she said. Rourke did not like that answer. Do not protect me from details. Lucy's gaze stayed on the switch. I am not, she replied. I am protecting time. She moved on. From somewhere deeper in the base, a faint alarm chirped and then cut out. The generator had dipped again. Even here in the hangar, Lucy felt it. The overhead lights dimmed for a beat, then recovered, but the recovery was slower than before. Rourke stepped back out of the cockpit doorway and glanced toward the hangar doors. Frost clung to the seams. Snow hissed through a gap near the bottom like steam. He keyed his radio out of habit, then remembered habit meant nothing in this storm. Still, he tried. Vance, he said. Report. Static answered. A smear of sound with no words. Rourke swore under his breath, then switched to a hand signal he could use only if he could see them. In this darkness and distance, he could not. He stepped toward the hangar window slit, a narrow strip where frost had been scraped away by someone's glove earlier. He peered through. Outside, the world was white and moving. Snow blew sideways. The floodlights were halos in the storm, their beams swallowed within a few yards. Visibility was a cruel joke. Rourke turned back to Lucy. Try again, he said. Lucy nodded. She adjusted the sequence, slightly flipping a breaker, then pressing the starter again with a firm, steady hand. This time the whine rose stronger. The engine coughed twice. A shudder ran through the airframe. Then the sound dropped and died again like a patient losing a pulse after a brief response. Lucy's jaw tightened. She tapped the gauge with a gloved finger as if she could scold it into honesty. Starter is struggling, she said, cold-soaked. Rourke's voice hardened. We do not have warm. Lucy's eyes flicked to him. Then we make it work anyway. She leaned forward, peered down at the lower panel, and adjusted another setting. Her breath fogged the glass. For a second, her hands trembled. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Lucy noticed his attention and forced her fingers still. Not fear, she said quietly, as if reading his mind. Cold. Rourke nodded once, then stepped out of the cockpit and scanned the hangar for anything useful. A maintenance cart sat near the table. Tools hung on a pegboard. Cans of fluid lined a shelf, their labels half obscured by frost. He grabbed a flashlight and swept it across the shelf with careful control. De-ice spray, a rag, a small toolkit. Nothing that resembled a ground power unit. He heard Lucy shifting inside the cockpit. The soft sound of plastic and switches. The kind of sounds that mattered more than gunfire when you were trying to leave. Rourke climbed back to the doorway. If it will not start, he said, we go back and we die slower. Lucy did not look up. "It will start," she replied. Rourke studied her face. "You sound sure." Lucy's mouth tightened. "I sound like someone who cannot afford doubt." She pressed the starter again. The engine whined. Cough, cough, shudder. Then a thin, steady whir began, faint but continuous. The rotor blades did not move yet, but Lucy's eyes lit with focus. "It is trying," she said. Rourke felt a fraction of relief, then crushed it. Relief made people sloppy. The whir faltered. The engine coughed one last time, then stopped. Lucy exhaled slowly through her nose. "Battery is almost done," she said. Rourke's throat went tight. "How many tries?" Lucy glanced at the gauge. "One," she said. "Maybe two if I do not waste it." Rourke's mind ran options. Go back for a ground power unit. But the generator was failing. The annex corridors were a maze of thin walls and blind corners. If someone was using the storm as cover, moving back and forth would be feeding them opportunities. He forced the thought away and focused on the present. "What else?" he asked. Lucy's eyes went to the intake indicators again. "Ice," she said. "If the intake is choked, it will not spin up. I need to check it." Rourke's jaw set. "Do it." Lucy unbuckled and climbed out, stepping down onto the hangar floor. The cold hit her immediately. Her breath came faster, clouding the air. She walked around the nose of the helicopter toward the engine intake panel, her boots crunching softly on the thin layer of snow that had drifted inside. Rourke followed rifle up now, scanning the wide hangar. The overhead lights flickered again, then steadied. The hum of the generator sounded lower, more strained, as if it was running out of patience. Lucy popped open the intake access. Frost clung inside, but she could not yet see heavy ice. She ran her gloved fingers along the edge, then frowned. "It is building," she said. "Not enough to choke it yet, but enough to make startup weak." Rourke glanced around again. The hangar doors were still intact, but the storm had packed snow along the bottom seam. Wind pushed against the metal in long, constant pressure. The building groaned softly, a sound like an old ship. Lucy looked at the shelf again. "De-ice spray," she said. "If I clear it now, the engine might catch on the last attempt." Rourke grabbed a can from the shelf and tossed it to her. Lucy caught it with one hand and nodded once. She sprayed the intake in short bursts, the chemical fog curling in the cold air. The smell was sharp and industrial, cutting through the hangar's stale metal scent. Rourke watched the doors while she worked. His gaze kept returning to the flight jacket on the chair, the folded sleeves. He imagined Lawson sitting there earlier, sipping coffee, not knowing his last view would be frost and metal. A sound rolled through the hangar then. A dull impact, heavy and wrong, traveling through the doorframe into the concrete under their feet. Rourke froze. Lucy froze. The storm did not hit like that. Wind was constant pressure and vibration. This was a strike. Another impact followed closer to the center seam. The hangar doors shuddered. Lucy's eyes lifted toward the doors, then flicked back to the intake panel. "That is not wind," she said quietly. Rourke's voice dropped to a whisper. "How fast can you get back in?" Lucy snapped the panel shut. "Now," she said. Rourke gestured with two fingers toward the cockpit. Lucy moved, not running wildly, just moving fast with control boots steady, shoulders tucked. Rourke stepped toward the narrow window slit again and peered through the scraped frost. At first he saw only white. Then, between gusts, he caught a darker shape near the edge of the floodlight glow. Another shape, low to the ground, moving with purpose, not drifting, not stumbling, moving. Rourke's muscles went hard. He turned his head toward Lucy, who was climbing into the cockpit again, and kept his voice low. "There are people out there," he said. Lucy did not look at him. She buckled in with quick efficiency. "Then we do not have time to be gentle with the startup," she replied. Rourke took position beside the cockpit doorway rifle, angled toward the hangar doors. He could not see faces, but he could see movement in the gaps between gusts, now silhouettes using the storm like camouflage. Another impact hit the doors. Metal groaned. Lucy pressed the starter with her last chance. The engine whined stronger than before. It coughed, then coughed again. The airframe shuddered. Rourke's eyes stayed on the doors. His finger took up slack on the trigger. Lucy stared at the gauge's lips moving silently through the checklist like a prayer she refused to admit was a prayer. The engine faltered. Lucy's hand moved to a switch, then another, correcting with instinct rather than thought. The whine steadied for a heartbeat, then dropped again. Rourke heard the pitch fall and felt his gut clench. Lucy's eyes narrowed at the battery gauge. "Come on," she breathed, not loud enough to carry past the cockpit. The hangar doors slammed inward again. This time the seam flexed. A bolt squealed under strain. Lucy lifted her eyes to the windshield and said, not with fear, but with certainty, "They found us." The words, "They found us," did not have time to settle before the hangar doors answered with another hit, deep and deliberate like someone testing where the metal would give first. The seam bowed inward. Frost flaked off in brittle sheets. Snow shoved through the crack in a thin, angry stream. Rourke lifted his rifle. He did not shout. He did not waste breath on warnings that would only bounce off panic. He raised 2 fingers toward Lucy, a silent command to stay low, then shifted his stance to put his shoulders square to the doors. "Do not look at them," he told her without turning his head. "Look at your gauges." Lucy's hands tightened on the controls. Her eyes flicked from the battery gauge to the starter circuit, then back to the engine indicators. The cockpit glass trembled with every impact. The last battery bars on the display looked like a countdown that refused to stop. Outside, something scraped along the metal, slow and patient. Not wind, tool against steel. Rourke felt his pulse drop into a cold, sharp rhythm. His mind started measuring angles, distance to cover, line of fire from the doors to the cockpit, space between the landing skids and the maintenance table. Places a body could move without becoming a silhouette in the overhead lights. Another scrape. Then a crack, short and violent. The hangar doors did not swing open. They failed. A hinge screamed metal warped, and the storm shoved the slab inward, as if it had been waiting for permission. A man stepped through, first rifle up, goggles rimmed with ice. His head moved in a slow sweep, not frantic, not drunk, not confused. He entered like he had rehearsed the room. A second man followed, then a third, spaced cleanly, each one taking a different lane of sight. Their boots were wrapped for snow. Their rifles were not hunting rifles. Their posture was not amateur. Rourke did not give them time to breathe. 2 controlled shots cracked through the hangar. The first intruder jerked backward and fell hard, his weapon clattering across the concrete. The second tried to pivot and return fire, but Rourke was already shifting, using the helicopter skid as cover, moving like the hangar belonged to him. The second intruder fired anyway. The round struck the floor and sparked, then another hit the side of the helicopter, a sharp metallic slap that made Lucy flinch in the cockpit. Rourke spoke into his radio by reflex, then remembered the storm had eaten every signal. He switched to a short, hard yell instead. Contact in the hangar. His voice bounced off concrete and steel and came back thinner than it should have swallowed by the storm's howl. Footsteps pounded in the corridor behind him. One of his men appeared at the hangar entrance, weapon up, face pale under the light. Cole Vance. His eyes widened when he saw the intruders. "How many?" Vance asked. "Enough," Rourke answered, then fired again, forcing the intruders to duck behind the bent door slab and a stack of crates near the entrance. Lucy kept her eyes down, but she could not avoid the sound. Gunfire in a hangar did not sound like it did on a range. It echoed and stretched and turned into something bigger, something that pressed against her chest. She forced her breathing into a steady count. In, out, hands on switches, eyes on the panel. She pressed the starter again. The engine whined, coughed, and stuttered. The rotor twitched just a fraction, then stopped. Lucy's stomach dropped. The battery dipped again. The numbers did not care about courage. A round struck the overhead light. Glass exploded and rained down in glittering shards. The hangar strobed with muzzle flashes and dim emergency bulbs. Rourke moved left, then right, drawing fire away from the cockpit. His boots slid on a thin crust of snow that had blown in. He planted hard and shot through a gap between crates. One of the intruders dropped behind cover with a grunt that cut short. Vance took a knee near the maintenance table and fired in short bursts, disciplined, not wasting rounds. Lucy tried the starter one more time. The engine coughed harder this time, like it wanted to live, then died again. The sound left a ringing silence behind it that felt like a verdict. She stared at the gauges. Her fingers hovered over the switches, refusing to tremble. "Voltage is collapsing," she muttered to herself. Voice low enough that it stayed inside the cockpit. "Come on, come on." Rourke heard the engine struggle and glanced back. His jaw tightened. He was fighting men at the door while fighting time on the panel. Neither enemy cared if he was tired. More figures pushed through the broken door. Not a flood, but a measured entry, two at a time, using the storm and the twisted slab as cover. One intruder fired high, trying to rake the cockpit. Rourke stepped into the line and returned fire, forcing the shooter down. Then the intruders changed. They stopped trying to win the hangar outright and started probing, looking for routes past the helicopter toward the corridor that led into the annex. Rourke saw it in the way their muzzles angled, in the way one of them glanced toward the interior door and signaled with 2 fingers. "They are not here for the aircraft," Rourke said more to himself than anyone. His eyes narrowed. "They are here for the building." A burst of gunfire answered him. A round punched into the maintenance cart. A tool skittered across the floor and clanged into the wall. Lucy unclipped her harness and leaned toward the cabin door, peering out through the cockpit glass. She caught a glimpse of movement near the entrance shadows, cutting sideways, trying to slip around the right side of the hangar. Rourke shifted instantly. "Kincaid," he shouted toward the corridor. Right side. A single shot cracked from somewhere Lucy could not see. Clean and final. A body dropped behind the crates with a heavy thud. Kincaid appeared at the hangar threshold a moment later, face calm, eyes flat, weapon steady. He took in the hangar in one sweep and spoke in the same tone someone used to report weather. "They are splitting," he said. 2 just broke toward the hospital wing. The words punched Lucy harder than the gunfire. Sandra. Dr. Hale. The patients in the ICU rooms. The hypothermic operator whose eyes had already been slipping away. Rourke's expression did not change, but Lucy saw something harden in it. "Vance," Rourke said. "Maddox, go." Vance hesitated, eyes flicking to the hangar gate. "Chief, you are light on guns." Rourke did not look away from the intruders. "If they reach the patients, we lose everything," he said. "Move." Troy Maddox appeared behind Vance, taller shoulders squared. He did not argue. He grabbed Vance by the sleeve and pulled him back into the corridor. "Come on," Maddox said, and the 2 of them vanished toward the annex with boots pounding concrete. Lucy's throat tightened. Fewer rifles in the hangar. More danger in the cockpit. She forced herself back into the seat and stared at the panel like it was the only truth left. Rourke fired, then slid behind a fuel crate using it as cover, while keeping his line of sight on the doors. Kincaid moved closer to the helicopter, taking position near the landing skid with an angle that protected Lucy without blocking her exit. "You stay in the cockpit," Rourke called. "Do not come out." Lucy did not answer. She was already moving. She reached for the emergency checklist again, scanning it faster, then slower, then faster again, as if the right speed would make the helicopter cooperate. The engine intake problem pressed at the edge of her mind like a splinter. Cold, soaked, icing airflow. A simple chain of causes with deadly consequences. A round snapped against the cockpit frame. The impact shook the glass and sent a spiderweb crack across the corner. Lucy ducked instinctively, then sat back up and forced her hand steady. Kincaid fired once, dropping an intruder who had tried to rush the left side. His shot was so precise it felt quiet compared to the chaos around it. Rourke shifted position again, drawing fire toward himself. He moved like he was dragging the enemy's attention by the collar away from the cockpit and toward the hangar's deeper shadows where his team had better angles. But the intruders were disciplined. They did not chase blindly. They used cover. They fired in short, controlled bursts. One of them started firing at the overhead lights again, trying to kill illumination, and turned the hangar into a dark box. Glass fell. The lights flickered. The storm roared through the broken seam and made every muzzle flash flare brighter. Lucy stared at the battery gauge. It was dropping in slow, cruel steps. She made a decision that did not feel like bravery. It felt like triage. She unbuckled again and climbed out. The cold hit her face like punishment. Snow whipped in through the door gap and stung her cheeks. She jumped down and ran to the maintenance table, keeping low using the helicopter body as a shield. Rourke saw her movement and shouted once, voice sharp, "Grant, get back in the aircraft." Lucy did not stop. She yanked open a drawer with fingers that were already losing warmth. De-ice spray cans sat inside, half frozen but usable, a small toolkit, a rag. She grabbed 2 cans and turned, sprinting back toward the engine intake panel. Kincaid shifted his body to block a line of fire as she crossed open space. A round struck the concrete inches from Lucy's boot and sparked. She kept running. At the intake panel, she popped it open with a hard tug and sprayed into the throat of the engine, short bursts, steady rhythm. Chemical fog curled back into her face and made her eyes water. She blinked hard and kept going. Rourke fought to keep the intruders pinned near the door. He fired, then moved, then fired again, never giving them the chance to settle. His shoulder bumped the side of the helicopter as he slid past, and Lucy heard the scrape of his gear against metal. Time he called to her. "How much do you need?" Lucy scraped at a crust of ice with a tool from the kit, the metal biting the ice, refusing. 30 seconds, she said. "Then take it," Rourke replied and stepped into a line of fire to buy her those seconds. The intruders responded with a coordinated push. 2 moved left, 1 moved right, trying to stretch Rourke and Kincaid thin. They fired toward the helicopter skids, trying to force the SEALs away from cover. Kincaid dropped to a knee and fired once, then again, each shot chosen, each shot ending a problem. But even precision could not erase numbers. Lucy's fingers went numb around the tool. She scraped harder, sprayed again, then slammed the panel shut. "Done," she yelled, then ran back toward the cockpit. Rourke shifted to cover her run. He fired a short burst that forced the nearest intruder to duck, then moved to the side, keeping himself between Lucy and the door. Lucy climbed into the cockpit and buckled in with a jerky motion that betrayed the cold and the adrenaline. Her hands found the switches again, and for a moment the cockpit felt small and safe even as bullets struck outside. She pressed the starter. The engine whined, coughed again. The rotor twitched a little more than before. Lucy leaned in, eyes on the gauge's mouth tight. "Come on," she whispered. The engine faltered. The rotor stopped. Lucy slammed her palm against the console, once not rage but focus. She forced her hand back to the switches. Outside, Rourke heard footsteps in the corridor leading into the annex. Not the heavy controlled steps of his own operators. Faster steps. More chaotic. Then Maddox's voice echoed back from inside the building. "They are in the hallway." Gunfire erupted from within the annex. The sound muffled by walls, then sharper as it bounced into the hangar corridor. The intruders had made it past the hangar edge. They were inside. Lucy's chest tightened. The patients upstairs were no longer an abstract threat. They were targets in a narrow hallway. Rourke's eyes flicked towards the corridor for half a second, then back to the hangar doors. His face stayed controlled, but Lucy could see the strain in his jaw. Kincaid moved closer to Rourke, voice low, urgent, without panic. "Chief, we cannot hold both," he said. Rourke did not answer. He fired again, dropping an intruder who had tried to rush the entrance. The body hit the metal door slab and slid down, leaving a smear that looked too dark against the snow. Lucy tried the starter again. The battery gauge dipped to a level that made her throat go dry. The engine coughed, shuddered, then died. She stared at the panel. Her hands hovered. Something was wrong, beyond ice, beyond cold soak, beyond voltage. The failures were too clean, too consistent, like the helicopter was being told to fail. She forced that thought away and focused on what she could control. Rourke's voice cut through the cockpit glass. "Grant talked to me." Lucy swallowed and answered, keeping her tone steady. "I cleared intake," she said. "The battery is almost gone." Rourke's eyes stayed on the doorway as he spoke. Can it fly? Lucy held the starter button in her mind like a trigger she only got to pull once more. "If it catches, yes," she said. "If it does not, we have nothing." Rourke exhaled slowly. He looked toward the annex corridor again. Gunfire inside had turned into short, sharp exchanges, the kind that meant Maddox and Vance were still alive and still fighting in hallways that were too tight for comfort. Then the intruders did something that made the hangar feel colder. They stopped firing at Rourke and started firing toward the corridor, not to hit the seals, to cover their own men moving deeper into the building. Lucy heard the shift in the pattern and understood. The intruders were not improvising. This was a plan executed under the cover of a storm that had cut the world off. Rourke shouted toward the corridor voice hard, "Hold the line." Maddox's response came back strained. "We are trying." Lucy's breath caught. She imagined the narrow hospital hallway, the walls lined with supply carts, the ICU doors, the patients who could not get up, the ventilators that would fail if the generator quit. She pressed the starter again, ignoring the warning lights, ignoring the voice in her head that said the battery did not care how badly she wanted this. The engine whined, but weaker now, like it was tired of trying. It coughed once, then died. Lucy stared at the gauge. The last of the voltage bled away. Her hands went still. Outside, Rourke fired until his magazine ran dry, then reloaded with a clean motion that never took his eyes off the door. Kincaid moved to cover him, firing a single shot that forced an intruder down at the wrong moment. Rourke slammed the magazine home and spoke without looking back. "Can you restart it?" Lucy swallowed. Her mouth felt dry and thick. "Not like this," she said. Rourke's voice stayed calm, but it was a calm that had sharpened into something else. "Then find another way," he said. Lucy's eyes snapped down to the panel. Her mind moved fast, scanning systems, searching for anything she had missed, anything she could steal from a dead aircraft. She reached for the checklist again, then stopped. Because the list was not the problem. Power was the problem. The helicopter was cold and drained, and sitting in a hangar that was turning into a battlefield. Lucy looked toward the cabin door, then out toward the maintenance table, then toward the annex corridor where gunfire still cracked in short, desperate bursts. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady as she reached under the seat and pulled free a bundled cable she had seen in training and hoped she would never need. A jump lead set for ground power, heavy and stiff with cold. Rourke's head turned sharply, noticing the movement. "What is that?" he demanded. Lucy tightened her grip on the cable. "A chance," she said, and climbed out of the cockpit again, dragging the stiff line behind her across the hangar floor. Rourke shifted to cover her without asking where she was going. He trusted motion more than explanations. Lucy ran toward the maintenance bay doors at the far side of the hangar, where a small room housed tools and equipment. If a ground power unit existed anywhere, it would be there. The air in that corner was colder, the lights weaker. Shadows pooled along the walls. She yanked the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled of oil rubber and cold metal. Shelves held spare parts, fluid cans, coiled hoses. A portable generator sat in the corner, too small to power a helicopter, but beside it, half covered by a tarp, was a ground power cart with a cable reel. Lucy's pulse jumped. She grabbed the tarp and ripped it off, fingers slipping on frozen fabric. The cart looked old, but intact. She twisted the switch. Nothing. She hit it again. Still nothing. Lucy clenched her teeth and crouched, popping open the side panel. The battery inside was connected, but the terminals were crusted with oxidation and ice. She scraped at them with the tool, fast and furious, then reseated the connection with a hard shove. Behind her, gunfire cracked, louder, closer. The hangar fight was creeping in her direction. Rourke was being pressed back by numbers and angles. Lucy twisted the switch again. The cart whined, coughed, then caught with a low rumble. A small green light flickered alive. Lucy exhaled, sharp and relieved, then did not let herself celebrate. She grabbed the cable and hauled it toward the hangar opening. Rourke spotted her coming out with the line and shouted once, voice raw, "Move." Lucy ran, dragging the cable across the concrete. It snagged on a tool cart. She yanked it free. Snow whipped in from the broken doors and slapped her face. Kincaid fired, then shifted, covering her path. Rourke moved in tandem, stepping into a lane of fire to draw attention away from her. Lucy reached the helicopter and threw the cable up onto the skid, then climbed into the cockpit, pulling the connector through the doorway with numb hands. "Plug it in," Rourke snapped. "I know," Lucy shot back, and her voice came out sharper than she meant. She shoved the connector into the power port with a hard twist until it locked. Outside, the cart hummed faintly, feeding electricity into the aircraft like a transfusion. The panel blinked. Once, then again. Lights sputtered into life across the cockpit, dim but real. Screens flickered, hesitated, then stabilized in a weak glow that felt like sunrise. Lucy's breath caught. Her hands moved fast now. "Battery switch, systems check, starter ready." Rourke's voice came from outside, tight with effort. "Now, Grant." Lucy pressed the starter. The engine whined, stronger than it had all night. A deep shudder ran through the frame. The rotor twitched, then turned just a fraction, as if waking from sleep. Lucy leaned in, eyes locked on the gauges, refusing to blink. Outside, Rourke and Kincaid fired in disciplined bursts, holding the door line as intruders pushed again, trying to flood the hangar before the aircraft could come alive. From the annex corridor, Maddox's voice cracked through the noise, strained and urgent. "Chief, they are at the ICU doors." Lucy's hands did not stop moving. Her mind did not stop calculating. The helicopter shuddered again, the engine fighting for stable rotation. The hangar filled with smoke and snow, and the sharp smell of burnt powder. The rotor began to turn faster, slow at first, then gaining a steady thump, building like a heartbeat. Lucy felt the vibration through the seat. She felt the aircraft waking beneath her. She lifted her eyes for a single moment and looked through the cockpit glass at Rourke, who was firing from behind a crate, his body angled to keep the intruders from getting a clean shot at the cockpit. Rourke met her gaze for the briefest beat. His face did not ask if she was ready. It asked if the machine was. Lucy turned back to the panel and tightened her grip on the controls until her knuckles ached under the gloves. "Hold," she said quietly, more to the helicopter than to anyone else, and pressed deeper into the start sequence while gunfire thundered in the hallways behind the hangar walls. The helicopter's tremor deepened into a steadier vibration, the kind you felt in your teeth before you heard it in your ears. Lucy kept her eyes locked on the panel, watching the screen stabilize in a thin green glow as the ground power cart fed life into circuits that had been dying by inches. Outside the cockpit, the hangar was a chaos of snow and muzzle flashes. Rourke and Kincaid held their positions with the hard economy of men who had learned that every bullet was a decision. Rourke leaned out from behind the crate, fired 2 shots, then shifted again before the intruders could mark him. Kincaid's rifle cracked once, and one of the shapes near the broken doors folded, dropped, and disappeared into drifting white. Lucy forced her breathing slow. She had done this in training with instructors barking in her ear with alarms blaring on purpose, with failure built into the drill. This was not a drill. The cockpit glass rattled when rounds struck metal outside. The rotor blades turned still slow, still waking their thump uneven like a heart trying to find a rhythm. In the corridor, beyond the hangar, gunfire snapped in short bursts, then stopped, then snapped again. Maddox and Vance were still fighting in the annex hallways in narrow angles where a single step could put a muzzle in your face. Maddox's voice came faint through the walls again, strained and sharp. "They are at the ICU doors." Lucy's stomach tightened so hard it felt like a cramp. She pictured the ICU wing, the ventilator alarms, the patients who could not stand the hypothermic operator whose eyes had already been losing their fight with consciousness. She pictured Sandra and Dr. Hale trying to keep hands steady while the building shook. She kept moving anyway. Battery switch, avionics, fuel pumps, anti-ice. She tried to keep her hands from rushing because rushing made mistakes, and mistakes in the cockpit were never single mistakes. They cascaded. The engine starter whined stronger now. The airframe shuddered. The rotor speed increased a fraction, then another. The thump became more even. The helicopter was waking. Rourke's voice cut through the cockpit glass, tight with effort but still controlled. "Grant, how close?" Lucy did not take her eyes off the gauges. "It is coming up," she said. "I need stable RPM before I can trust it." A round hit the side of the helicopter with a metallic slap. Lucy flinched, then forced herself still. The impact had not pierced. Not yet. She kept her hands moving. The ground power cart hummed louder, a steady mechanical growl behind the cockpit. The cable fed through the doorway and vibrated slightly with the helicopter's rising power demand. Lucy watched the voltage stabilize, felt a sliver of relief, then crushed it down. Relief was a luxury. She glanced at the lower panel again, then froze. Fuel feed. The switch was off. Not low, not intermittent, not failing. Off, clean and deliberate. Her throat went dry. She stared at it for half a second too long, as if her eyes could force the switch to admit it had been wrong by accident. But accidents did not flip fuel feed off and leave it neatly set. Her mind snapped into a hard, cold clarity. Someone had touched this. Someone had touched it while she was in the hangar, while the doors were breaking, while the SEALs were fighting. Someone had touched it while everyone else was too busy bleeding and shooting to reach into a cockpit. Lucy's pulse jumped. She glanced toward the hangar, toward the maintenance bay shadows where the ground power cart had been covered under a tarp. The corner light there flickered dim and unreliable. Snow swirled through the broken seam, turning everything into shifting gray. She saw movement near the lockers. Not a SEAL. Not one of the intruders not dressed in snow gear. Hospital scrubs under a jacket. A staff badge. A man she had not noticed during the rush because he had blended into the background the way background people learned to. He stood too still. One hand held a small radio close to his chest. The other held a pistol low at his thigh muzzle, down but ready. He watched the helicopter like it was the only thing in the hangar that mattered. Lucy's mouth went dry. The storm outside had killed every channel Rourke tried. Yet this man held a radio like it was alive in his hand. Lucy leaned closer to the mic and kept her voice low, steady, stripped of emotion. "Chief," she said. Rourke did not answer immediately, too busy firing, too busy moving. Lucy tried again, louder, without raising her tone. "Chief? Fuel feed was shut off. Someone is inside with us." Rourke's head snapped toward the cockpit. His eyes cut to Lucy's face, then followed her gaze. The staff member's pistol rose, the muzzle aimed straight at the cockpit glass. Lucy dropped low in the seat a fraction of a second before he fired. The round shattered the upper corner of the cockpit glass and sprayed fragments inward like ice. Lucy felt a sting on her cheek, a thin cut, warm blood in cold air. She did not scream. She did not even gasp. She folded down behind the panel and spoke into the mic like she was calling a code. "He is shooting the cockpit. He wants the bird grounded." Rourke did not ask for confirmation. He did not demand explanation. He pivoted and fired into the shadowed corner with a controlled burst that forced the traitor back behind the lockers. At the same instant, the building went dead. Not a flicker, not a dip. Dead. The generator failed, like a heart quitting mid-beat. The hangar lights snapped out. The corridor lights vanished. The annex beyond fell into black. For one breath, the world was pure darkness, with the storm screaming at the doors. Then muzzle flashes started carving strobe light through the hangar. Each shot lit faces for a fraction of a second, then erased them again. The helicopter's panel glow became the only steady light, a dim green rectangle that made Lucy's hands look pale and unreal. Rourke's voice cut through the dark, hard, and immediate. "Kincaid. Left. Hold the door." Kincaid's reply came as a single gunshot, then another, clean and spaced. Lucy lifted her head just enough to see the fuel feed switch again. Off. She could fix that. She could flip it back on. But the traitor was still out there, and he had already shown he would shoot into the cockpit without hesitation. She kept low, reached up, and flipped the fuel feed on with a sharp click. The engine whine changed instantly deeper and steadier, like the helicopter had been starving, and finally got air. Lucy pressed the starter again. The engine coughed, then caught for a heartbeat longer than before. Outside, the intruders shouted in the dark, their voices muffled by scarves and wind. Boots scraped concrete. The broken hangar door groaned as it shifted under pressure. Rourke moved in short bursts, firing only when he had a target. In the darkness, he did not waste ammunition. He did not chase muzzle flashes. He hunted shapes and sound and motion the way men did when they had trained for nights exactly like this. The traitor fired again from the shadows. The muzzle flash lit his face for a fraction. His expression was not panicked, it was focused. Mission focused. Lucy felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. This was not greed. This was not a desperate man trying to survive. This was a plan. The traitor stopped shooting and ran, not toward the intruders, not toward the broken hangar door. He ran straight toward the fuel controls near the side of the helicopter, toward the cable connection, toward anything that could stop the aircraft from waking. Rourke saw him and surged forward, boots pounding. Kincaid shifted to cover Rourke's movement, firing once to pin an intruder who tried to rush. Lucy shoved the starter again. The engine sputtered, fought, then caught harder. The rotor speed increased. The thump grew louder. The blades began to bite the air, pushing wind and snow in a rising wash that slapped against the hangar walls. The traitor reached the cable first. He grabbed it with both hands, yanking, trying to pull the connector free. Lucy's heart lurched. Without the ground power cart, the startup would die again. The battery could not carry it. She unbuckled and climbed out of the cockpit, dropping to the hangar floor with the cable in her hands. Rourke was still too far. Kincaid was pinned down by intruder fire near the door. The traitor twisted, pulling with all his weight. Lucy dug her boots into the concrete and yanked back. The cable strained between them. Snow and dust swirled around their legs in the rotor wash. The traitor's pistol came up. He jammed it toward her ribs. "You do not get to leave," he hissed, his voice harsh and close. Lucy did not step back. She did not plead. She acted. She stomped his foot hard enough to make his knee buckle. At the same time, she drove her elbow back into his throat, not wide, not sloppy, tight and brutal. His breath cut off with a wet choke. His grip loosened on the cable. Lucy twisted her body, using his momentum against him, and shoved him toward the helicopter skid. The pistol slipped. The muzzle angled away from her for a fraction. That was enough. Rourke slammed into the traitor from the side like a collision, driving him to the concrete. The traitor hit hard and tried to roll. Rourke pinned him with a knee to the ribs, wrenched the pistol free, and shoved the man's face into the cold floor. "Who are you?" Rourke growled, voice low and lethal. The traitor spat blood. "You do not understand what is in that hospital." Rourke pressed harder. "I understand you threatened civilians." From the corridor inside the annex, a different voice rose louder than gunfire, carrying through the darkness with a smug calm. "Bring the nurse out." Silence hit for a beat, thick and wrong, as if even the intruders wanted everyone to hear the next words. "Or we start with the patients." Lucy froze. The rotor wash tore at her parka. The cockpit lights painted the floor in a faint green glow. She pictured the ICU door. She pictured a hand on a ventilator tube. A muzzle pressed to someone who could not even lift their arms. Rourke's jaw tightened so hard the muscle jumped near his ear. He looked toward the corridor. He could not see it from this angle, only darkness and echoes. Kincaid's voice came from near the door, clipped and urgent. "Chief, they are inside the wing." Rourke did not release the traitor. He shoved the pistol barrel against the man's cheek. "You made them come here," Rourke said. The traitor's laugh was short and bitter. The storm was the lock. "You were the noise." Lucy forced her mind back to the helicopter. The engine was still unstable, still in startup. The cable was still connected. The ground power cart was still humming. The rotor speed was still climbing. If she left it now, it would die. If it died, there would be no sky. She pulled away from the traitor and climbed back into the cockpit, moving fast, but controlled as if speed could replace certainty. Rourke's voice followed her hard and restrained. "Grant, do not take off without my people." Lucy did not answer because her hands were already busy. She flipped the right switches, checked the right lights, fed the engine what it needed. Her mind ran through the sequence like a heartbeat. In the darkness, the cockpit felt like the only room in the world with rules. The engine coughed again, then steadied. The rotor speed rose. The thump became smoother, heavier, more confident. Then, outside, the intruders near the broken doors stopped firing and started moving. Lucy heard it in the change of footsteps, the scramble of boots, the shouted commands. They had heard the rotor. They knew the helicopter was coming alive. They were repositioning to rush it before it could lift. Rourke released the traitor with a shove that sent him sprawling, then snapped his rifle up and moved toward the entrance again. "Kincaid," Rourke barked. "Hold them." Kincaid answered with a steady string of single shots, each one chosen. He was not trying to spray the dark. He was trying to keep a corridor of space open between the intruders and the helicopter. In the annex corridor, gunfire erupted again, closer. Now sharper, the sound of fighting in tight halls. Maddox shouted something, then a crash followed like a cart knocked over. Lucy's eyes flicked to the engine gauges. Stable enough. Not perfect, but alive. She pulled on the collective, slightly testing. The helicopter responded with a subtle lift and vibration. She eased it back down. Not yet. Not until the last person was aboard. Rourke moved back toward the helicopter, dragging the wounded timeline behind him with every step. "Where are my injured?" he shouted toward the corridor voice cutting through rotor thump. A shape stumbled out of the darkness from the hangar corridor entrance. Vance, face smeared with blood that was not all his. He had an operator under one arm, half carrying, half dragging. The wounded man's boot dragged along the floor, leaving a faint line in snow dust. Behind them, Maddox appeared, supporting another figure moving fast with a limp that suggested he had taken a hit. "They are behind us," Maddox panted. "They are pushing the wing." Rourke did not waste questions. "Get them in," he ordered. Vance hauled the wounded operator toward the cabin door. Kincaid shifted to cover them, firing twice, forcing intruders near the door to duck behind the twisted slab. Lucy leaned out of the cockpit and reached back into the cabin, grabbing the wounded operator's vest strap with both hands. The man was heavier than he looked, dead weight in cold gear. Lucy braced her boots against the cockpit frame and pulled. Vance shoved from below. Come on," he grunted. Lucy's arms burned. She did not let go. She hauled until the man's upper body slid onto the cabin floor, then pulled again until his legs cleared the skid. He rolled inside with a rough gasp. "Stay down," Lucy snapped, not unkind, just absolute. The second wounded man reached the skid and collapsed, his knees folding. Maddox grabbed his collar and tried to lift. The man's head lolled, eyes unfocused. Lucy saw the collapse and her chest tightened. She unbuckled one strap, leaned out farther, and caught the man under the arm. Rourke appeared at the skid rifle, still up, eyes scanning the door. He grabbed the wounded man's other side and lifted in a hard heave that dragged the man into the cabin. Gunfire hammered the hangar entrance. The intruders were rushing now, firing wild bursts into darkness, trying to kill the only thing that could lift anyone out. Rounds sparked off the helicopter body. One hit the skid. Another punched into the hangar floor and exploded concrete chips. Kincaid took a hit of rotor wash and stumbled, then recovered, firing again, holding the rush back by inches. Rourke shouted over the rotor noise, "Cable, we are taking off!" Lucy's eyes widened. "If I disconnect now, I lose avionics stability." Rourke's expression did not change. "If we do not lift you, lose everything." Lucy swallowed and reached for the switch that would cut reliance on the cart. She hated it. She hated the idea of taking a half-awakened aircraft into a storm, but she hated the alternative more. She moved the system to onboard power, watched the panel dip, then recover. The engine held. The rotor speed held. For a heartbeat, the helicopter stayed alive on its own. Lucy exhaled once sharp. Outside, Rourke yanked the connector free and shoved the cable clear. The ground power cart fell silent, its usefulness finished. The moment the cart went quiet, The intruders surged again, sensing the shift. Rourke and Kincaid formed the last shield at the cabin door, firing controlled bursts while Maddox and Vance climbed inside. Maddox slammed the cabin door as bullets snapped through the air behind him. Lucy's hands tightened on the controls. Rourke climbed in last one boot on the skid, one hand on the door frame. He looked back into the hangar darkness, eyes scanning for anything that still moved with intent. The traitor lay near the lockers, not dead, but pinned under his own failure, clutching at his throat. His radio had fallen from his hand and lay on the floor like a black brick. From the annex corridor, the smug voice rose again, closer now, furious. "Bring her out." Lucy closed her eyes for half a beat, then opened them and stared through the windshield into a white world that did not care. She raised the collective. The helicopter lifted. Not smooth, not graceful. Violent. The skids broke contact with the concrete and the storm grabbed the aircraft, instantly slamming it sideways with a gust that made the cabin tilt and bodies sway. The rotor wash churned snow into a swirling cloud, erasing the hangar floor beneath them. Someone inside yelled something, the words lost to the roar. Lucy fought the controls arms burning, jaw clenched so hard it ached. She kept the nose into the wind, corrected the yaw, held the climb by force of will and trained reflex. Rourke braced himself in the cabin, gripping a strap, eyes still on the broken hangar doors as the intruders fired upward their rounds, snapping past the belly of the aircraft. The helicopter climbed inches, then a foot, then another, dragging itself upward like it refused to die. Lucy did not look back. She flew. The helicopter clawed upward like it was being dragged by invisible hands that wanted it back. The skids cleared the hangar floor, and the storm hit the fuselage with a sideways punch, snapping the nose left, then right, then left again, as if the wind could slap a living thing into submission. Lucy gripped the cyclic until her forearms burned. Her gloves creaked against the rubber grips. The instrument panel glowed faint green, just bright enough to show numbers that refused to sit still. Rotor speed wavered, then steadied. Torque spiked, then dipped. The aircraft shuddered heavy with bodies and gear, and the stubborn weight of survival. In the cabin behind her, a wounded man groaned low and involuntary, the kind of sound that meant pain was no longer something he could hide. Someone cursed. Someone prayed without meaning to. Rourke's voice came from the right seat area, braced against the cabin frame, his breath loud in the headset mic. "Hold it," he said. Lucy did not answer. Not because she was ignoring him, but because speech was extra movement, and extra movement could become the one thing that tipped her hands into a mistake. The hangar roof slid past the windshield and disappeared into a blur of white. The broken doors below became a dark, jagged line. Muzzle flashes popped from the ground like angry fireflies, then vanished as quickly as they appeared. Rounds snapped past the belly of the aircraft and disappeared into the storm, pointless now. The helicopter was already out of reach. Still, the storm was not done with them. The world beyond the hangar was nothing but whiteout. The floodlights were gone. The ground was gone. The horizon was a rumor. Snow moved in thick sheets sideways and vertical at the same time, a curtain that made depth and distance feel like lies. Lucy kept the nose into the wind by feel. Not blind feel, but trained feel, the kind you learned when instruments were slow, and your body had to become the instrument. The helicopter bucked, yawing hard enough to make her teeth clack. "Too heavy," Vance shouted from the cabin. Lucy heard it even through the rotor roar. She felt it in the way the climb fought her, in the way the collective demanded more power than the engine wanted to give. Rourke leaned forward, one hand braced on the seat, voice tight. "Can you dump weight?" Lucy's eyes flicked across the panel. Fuel, load, torque. The numbers did not leave room for hero fantasies. "No," she said, and the single word came out rough, "not safely." Another gust slammed them. The helicopter dropped a fraction, a stomach-lurching dip that made the cabin tilt. A wounded operator sucked in a breath that sounded like fear, then tried to swallow it. Lucy corrected with a hard input, not smooth, not elegant, just right. The nose came back up, the rotor bite steadied. The aircraft stopped falling and started inching higher again, like it had decided it would climb, even if it hated the process. Her cheeks stung where the glass had cut her. Warm blood had dried in the cold air tight against her skin. She ignored it. Pain was information. She already had enough. Rourke watched her hands. He'd been watching since the hallway, since the moment she spoke like someone who belonged in the cockpit. He watched now for tremor, for panic, for the split second where a person started negotiating with fear. Lucy gave him none of it. She breathed through her nose, slow and steady. In, out, in, out. The storm beat on the fuselage. The cockpit glass vibrated. Snow streaked across the windshield in thick, fast lines. Lucy kept her gaze forward, not because she could see a path, but because the only way through whiteout was refusing to look away from the direction you chose. Altitude, Maddox said from behind, voice strained. We are not gaining. Lucy felt it. The sensation of hovering while time bled out. The torque needle jittering near the edge. The engine temperature rising. She eased the collective down a hair, then corrected the cyclic. Less demand. More stability. A slower climb that the machine could actually sustain. Stop yelling numbers, Lucy said, and her voice was calm enough to cut through the panic like a blade. Talk to me when you see something real. Silence fell for a beat. Then Rourke spoke quieter now. Keep it steady, he said. We can fight later. Lucy swallowed. She did not like later. Later was where consequences lived. But she understood what he meant. Survive the air first. Let the ground become someone else's problem. The helicopter climbed in stubborn increments. 10 feet, 20, 50. The rotor noise deepened into something smoother, a rhythm that felt less like a struggle and more like a decision. Lucy's instruments began to make sense again as the storm turbulence shifted. Not friendly, never friendly, but less chaotic. She saw a faint change in the snow pattern, the way the flakes started to move more downward than sideways. A sign small and real. She pushed the nose slightly, searching for cleaner air. Her eyes narrowed. Her hands stayed firm. The aircraft lurched again, but this time it recovered faster. Rourke's breath exhaled into the mic. There he said, as if he could feel it too. Lucy did not let herself nod. She did not let herself relax. Then the helicopter punched through a thinner layer of cloud, and the world shifted. Not clear. Not bright. But the snow became less dense, the wind less violent. A faint, gray line appeared ahead, the suggestion of dawn pressing through the storm like a bruise turning pale. Lucy's throat tightened. The horizon did not look beautiful. It looked possible. She keyed the radio out of reflex. Camp Redstone, she said, voice steady. This is Fort McCall aircraft. Request immediate response. For a heartbeat, only static answered a hateful reminder. Then, as if the air itself had finally agreed to carry sound, a voice came through. Faint crackling, but real. Aircraft say again. Lucy's hands tightened. Fort McCall. Medevac, she repeated. We have armed hostile intruders at the annex. Generator failure. Patients inside. Request QRF and medical support. Rourke leaned toward the mic without taking his eyes off the cabin, his voice carrying authority that did not need rank. This is Chief Mason Rourke, he said. We are inbound with wounded. Hostiles are in the annex. Treated as active threat. The reply came sharper now, less confused. Copy. Inbound vectors. Stand by. Lucy felt a grim satisfaction in her chest. Not victory. Just the relief of being heard. The relief of no longer being trapped inside a storm with no voice. She adjusted, heading toward the forward base. The helicopter responded heavy but stable, as if it had decided to cooperate now that it was away from the hangar and the gunfire. In the cabin, someone pressed a hand to a wound and hissed. Sandra was not there to clamp, to soothe, to command. The operators did it themselves, grim and practical. Vance tore open a field dressing and packed it with fingers that shook only once, then steadied. Maddox held pressure on the rib wound while the injured man clenched his jaw hard enough to crack teeth. Lucy kept flying. Minutes passed like hours. The storm thinned in patches, then thickened again, then thinned a shifting maze. Lucy did not chase clear skies. She chased stable air. The first sight of Camp Redstone was a smear of yellow light in the gray. Floodlights. A runway edge. A long, rectangular glow of a heated hangar that looked like a promise. Lucy's chest tightened again, this time with exhaustion that had been waiting for permission to exist. Her arms ached. Her shoulders were knots. She forced herself to stay clean and precise as she descended. Whiteout conditions still clung to the ground. Snow churned when she lowered altitude. She brought the aircraft in slow, careful, holding a shallow approach to avoid sudden sink. Rortig's voice came low. "You have it." Lucy did not answer. She did not need to. The aircraft was listening to her hands now, not to words. She landed harder than she wanted, the skids striking packed snow with a jolt that rattled spines. But it was down. It was real. It was alive. The rotor slowed, still spinning, still dangerous, while medics and security rushed in from the floodlit doors, faces masked against wind boots crunching. They moved with speed and discipline, the kind that said they had heard the radio call and believed it. A medic climbed to the cabin door and shouted over the rotor noise. "Who is critical?" Rourke leaned out. 2 he called. 1 chest wound, 1 hypothermia and blood loss. Hands reached in. Stretchers appeared. Warm blankets. Oxygen masks. The wounded were lifted and moved with practiced care that made Lucy's throat tighten. As the last of the operators climbed out, Vance turned back toward the cockpit for a beat, eyes meeting Lucy's through the cracked glass. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply nodded once, like a man acknowledging a debt he would never be able to repay in words. Lucy shut down the engine with the hands that finally trembled. The panel went dark. The cabin fell quiet except for the wind and the distant shout of medics calling for blood and heat. She unbuckled and stepped down last. The cold hit her again, but it was a different cold. This cold came with lights, with voices, with people who could help. It was not the lonely cold of Fort McCall. Her legs shook the moment her boots hit the ground. Not from fear now, but from the aftermath. Like her body had been holding itself together by force and finally loosened its grip. Rourke stepped onto the snow beside her. He looked like he had fought a war in a hallway. Frost clung to his gear. Powder burns darkened one glove. His eyes were flat with exhaustion, but there was something else beneath it now. Respect stripped of romance. He stared at Lucy for a long moment, then spoke, voice rough. "You did not just fly us out," he said. "You kept them alive long enough to reach help." Lucy swallowed. Her throat hurt. "They did their job," she said, nodding toward his team. Rourke did not let her deflect. "So did you." Lucy's gaze dropped to the snow. Blood from her cheek left a faint smear on her glove when she wiped it away. The sting reminded her that she was still in a body, still mortal. A security officer approached Rourke, speaking fast. "QRF is prepping for Fort McCall. Air assets are limited in this storm. Ground convoy is moving." Rourke nodded once. "Send them with power units and thermal gear," he said. "And tell them hostiles have rifles and interior access." The officer hesitated. "You sure the patients are still alive?" Rourke's eyes tightened. Lucy felt his worry like a physical thing. Lucy stepped closer. "Sandra Pike is there," she said. "She will keep them alive." Rourke's gaze flicked to her. "You trust her?" Lucy met his eyes. "She is not the one who will break." Rourke did not argue. He knew that tone. He had heard it before from men who had seen too much and still chose to stand. A black SUV rolled into the floodlight circle, then tires crunching snow. It did not move like a normal vehicle. It moved like a vehicle that expected doors to open for it. The engine did not idle long before it shut off. The driver remained inside. The rear door opened. An older man stepped out into the cold with no hurry, no visible security detail, no need to announce himself. His posture did that for him. A long coat, a calm face carved by years of decisions, the kind of presence that made nearby soldiers straighten without thinking. Rourke turned toward him, instinctively bracing, then stiffened. Sir Rourke said. The man's gaze did not go to the SEALs first. It went straight to Lucy. "Lieutenant Grant," he said quietly. Lucy's chest tightened. Her hand moved without thinking toward the edge of a salute, then stopped halfway. She seemed to catch herself and forced her arm down like she did not want attention. Rourke blinked surprise, cutting through his exhaustion. "You know her," he said. The man nodded once. "I know where she was placed, and why." Rourke's eyes narrowed, placed. The older man stepped closer. His boots made a soft crunch on the snow. His eyes stayed on Lucy with a focus that felt personal even as his voice stayed controlled. "You were not assigned a rookie nurse at Fort McCall by chance," he said to Rourke. That annex was chosen. That night was anticipated. Lucy's jaw tightened. She looked away toward the runway lights, toward anything that was not the older man's gaze. Rourke's voice hardened. Anticipated by who? The older man did not flinch at the tone. He answered like a man used to blunt questions. "People who knew the storm would cut communications," he said. "People who hoped to use isolation as a weapon." Rourke glanced toward the hangar where medics were still moving. "You are telling me this was planned?" The older man nodded. "The storm was cover. The failure of your pilot was a gift to them. The generator failure was not a coincidence." Lucy's throat moved as she swallowed. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on the pale line of sky that was slowly brightening. Rourke's jaw flexed. "The traitor," he said. "Hospital staff. He had a radio." The older man's gaze sharpened slightly. He did not need long-range comms, he said. He needed short-range coordination. The intruders were close enough. They only needed timing. Rourke stared at him, then back at Lucy. "They threatened patience," he said. "They demanded the nurse." Lucy's shoulders rose and fell once. A controlled breath. The older man spoke before she could. "They wanted her," he said. "And they wanted what she represents." Rourke's voice turned colder. "What does she represent?" For a moment, the older man did not answer. He looked at Lucy, as if asking permission without asking. Lucy's face remained still, but her hands tightened at her sides. Then the older man spoke, voice low. "Her father was Master Chief Daniel Grant," he said. "He served with distinction. He died making sure others lived." Rourke's expression shifted, not softened, but changed. Recognition flickered there like a name pulled from a locked drawer. Even Vance, walking past with a medic at his shoulder, slowed at the sound. Lucy stared at the snow now. Her eyelashes looked wet in the floodlight glow, but she blinked hard and held it back. Rourke took a slow breath. That does not explain why smugglers would hit a medical annex. The older man's mouth tightened. They were not smugglers in the simple sense he said. They were hired, they were guided, and they were told that if they captured her, they could unlock something the government buried. Lucy's jaw clenched. "Stop," she said softly. The older man paused. Lucy finally turned her face toward him. Her cheek had a thin line of blood where glass had cut her. The cut made her look more human than she probably wanted to be right now. "I did not fly through that storm to become a story," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the words carried weight. "I flew because people were dying." Rourke watched her, something in his eyes shifting again. Not pity, not worship, just a clearer understanding of what kind of person she was. The older man nodded once, accepting the rebuke without offense. "Understood," he said. Rourke looked between them. "Who are you?" he asked, though the answer was already forming in his posture. The older man's gaze met his. "Rear Admiral Thomas Grant," he said. The name landed heavy. Same last name, same quiet authority, same refusal to make it dramatic. Rourke's eyes widened a fraction. "You are family." The Admiral's expression did not change much, but his eyes softened by a degree that felt rare. "She is my granddaughter," he said. Silence spread through the floodlit area. It was not the shocked silence of gossip. It was the silence of people realizing the night had layers they had not been able to see while they were bleeding and shooting. Lucy did not react the way a person seeking approval would react. She looked away again, jaw tight, as if the word granddaughter felt like a chain she did not want wrapped around what she had done. Rourke took a step closer, his voice lower now. "You put her there." The Admiral nodded. "For protection," he said, "and for containment." Rourke's eyes narrowed. Containment. The Admiral's gaze moved briefly toward the horizon, toward the storm line that still hid Fort McCall. "There are programs that should stay buried," he said. "There are people who would kill to dig them up. Lucy was trained under a contingency program when she was younger. Not because we wanted her to be a pilot, but because we did not want her to die if the world went dark." Lucy's hands tightened again. The tendons in her neck stood out for a moment. She forced her shoulders down. Rourke stared at her. "Raven won," he said quietly. Lucy did not answer. She did not deny it either. Vance stood a few feet away now, half supported by a medic listening. Maddox leaned against a wall under the hangar overhang, face, pale eyes fixed on Lucy with an unreadable expression. Rourke's voice softened slightly, but it did not lose its edge. "You said you were not a nurse, then," he said. Lucy finally spoke, still without drama. "I was a problem to solve," she said, "for people who thought my father's enemies would come for me. They were right." The Admiral did not interrupt. He simply stood there, letting her voice carry the truth, letting her own words keep the night from turning into mythology. A radio crackled nearby. A base operations voice called out that the convoy was rolling, and that an armed response team had moved toward Fort McCall with thermal gear, portable generators, and medical support. Rourke exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. Not relief yet. Not fully. But the first loosening of the grip. Lucy turned toward Rourke. "They will reach Sandra," she said. Rourke nodded. "They will," he replied. The Admiral watched her for a moment, then spoke quieter. "You did well," he said. Lucy's eyes flashed. "They are still there," she said. "The patients." The Admiral nodded once. "And they will not be alone for long," he said. "Your call reached us. Your aircraft reached us." That changed the night. Lucy looked at him as if she wanted to argue, as if she wanted to tear away any implication that she was a piece on someone's board. Then she looked past him to the floodlit hangar doors, where medics moved in and out with purpose, where warmth spilled out like a living thing. Her breath came out in a slow stream. Her hands finally unclenched. Rourke stepped closer. He did not touch her. He seemed to understand she would not want that. But his voice when he spoke carried something that had not been there earlier. "I said things in that annex," he said. Lucy did not look at him. "You were scared," she replied, the same words she had used in another life, another room, another night. But here they sounded less like forgiveness and more like fact. Rourke swallowed. "So were we," he admitted. He looked toward his team, toward the men being treated, toward the ones who had fired until their hands hurt, then fired again. "You stayed calm when we could not." Lucy's eyes lifted to meet his. For a moment, the tough mask slipped enough to show exhaustion beneath it. "I was not calm," she said softly. "I just had somewhere to put it." Rourke stared at her, then made a decision. He straightened shoulders, squaring posture formal. He raised his hand and saluted her. Not fast, not casual, clean and deliberate. Maddox saw it, and pushed himself off the wall despite the limp. He saluted too. Vance, supported by the medic, shifted and saluted with his good arm. Kincaid, face still flat from fight mode, saluted like it was the most natural thing in the world. The injured men inside the hangar, half conscious, tried to move, and medics gently stopped them, but the intent was there. Lucy's throat tightened. She did not immediately return the salute. Her hand hovered at her side, fingers trembling. Then she lifted her hand and returned it crisp and restrained. For a second, the wind seemed quieter. The Admiral watched, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke to Rourke. "The team that hit your annex will be handled," he said. "The traitor will be handled. Your pilot will be honored." Rourke nodded once, not accepting comfort, but acknowledging reality. Lucy turned her head toward the runway again. Dawn had gained strength now. The sky was still gray, still cold, but it was no longer pure night. A medic approached and held up a small kit. "Lieutenant, you are bleeding." Lucy blinked, then touched her cheek as if she had forgotten the cut existed. The pain returned, sharp and present. She nodded once. "Do it," she said. The medic cleaned the cut, quickly gloved fingers careful. Lucy stared straight ahead and breathed through it without flinching. Rourke stepped a pace away, eyes on the horizon. His voice, when he spoke again, was low. "They demanded you," he said. Lucy's eyes stayed forward. "They thought I was the easiest prize in the building," she replied. Rourke's jaw tightened. "You were the hardest," he said. Lucy did not answer. She did not need to. The night had answered for her. A radio crackled again. This time, the voice was different, urgent, but controlled. "Camp Redstone, QRF, reports contact near Fort McCall perimeter. Hostiles retreating into the storm. Annex secured in progress. Medical staff accounted for." Lucy's breath caught. Rourke turned sharply. "Say again," he demanded. The voice repeated it clearer now. "Medical staff accounted for. Patients secure. Hostiles falling back." Lucy closed her eyes for a half-second, a motion so small it could have been mistaken for a blink. When she opened them, there was moisture there, but she did not let it fall. Sandra was alive. Dr. Hale was alive. The patients had not been taken. Lucy's shoulders dropped as if someone had finally loosened a strap around her lungs. Rourke exhaled a hard breath that sounded like it had been trapped in him for hours. He looked at Lucy and nodded once, a silent statement of shared relief. The Admiral stepped closer to Lucy again. His voice softened. "You can stand down now," he said. Lucy stared at the horizon. "I do not know how," she said, and for the first time there was a crack in her tone that hinted at the years behind her calm. The Admiral did not push. He simply stood beside her in the cold, not touching, not forcing. Present. Rourke turned away and began issuing quiet instructions to base personnel, confirming the convoy, confirming extraction, confirming that the hangar camera footage would be preserved, that the trader's radio would be secured if it could be recovered. He sounded like a man who had learned that survival was only half the job. The rest was making sure it did not happen again. Lucy watched him for a moment, then looked down at her hands. They were still trembling. Not from fear now, not from cold. From the release of being needed. She flexed her fingers slowly and felt the ache in her wrists, the soreness in her forearms, the raw tightness in her shoulders. Each ache was proof she had been alive in that cockpit. She lifted her gaze to the helicopter sitting on the snow, its cracked glass catching the floodlights. It looked tired. It looked battered. It looked like it had been dragged through hell and refused to stay there. Lucy whispered without meaning to. "Thank you." Rourke heard her. He did not pretend he had not. He simply nodded once, like he understood she was not speaking to him. The Admiral looked at the aircraft, then back at Lucy. "You did not become your father," he said softly. "You became yourself." Lucy's jaw tightened. She glanced at him, eyes sharp. "Do not turn him into a shadow." "I have to live under," she said. The Admiral held her gaze. "I will not," he replied. "But I will not let the world forget the price he paid to keep you breathing." Lucy looked away again. Lips pressed tight, then exhaled slowly. The fight was over, but her mind was still in it, still moving through corridors and checklists and the sound of the generator stuttering toward death. A base officer approached with a clipboard and a careful tone. "Lieutenant, we need a statement." Lucy stared at the clipboard like it was a foreign object. Rourke stepped in smoothly. "She will give it later," he said. "Right now, she gets warm." The officer hesitated, then nodded and backed away. Rourke looked at Lucy. "Come inside," he said. Lucy shook her head once. "Not yet," she replied. She looked toward the east where dawn was pushing harder through the clouds. "If I go inside, I will feel it. Then I will fall apart." Rourke studied her, then nodded as if recognizing the strategy. "Then we stand here," he said. They stood in the cold for a moment longer. the wind biting at their faces, the runway lights humming the sounds of medics and radios and boots moving around them like a world returning to function. Lucy kept her gaze on the horizon until her breathing finally slowed. Only then did she turn and walk toward the warmth, not as a hero, not as a legend, but as a woman who had carried a helicopter and a team through a night that tried to erase them.